My name is Martin Pastoors. I'm the Chief Science Officer of the Pelagic Freezer Trawler Association, and I've been invited to give a talk to you about the role of industry, fishing industry in science. Before I start, I would like to ask if everyone can hear me okay. If you can let me know in the chat whether that is working. And I also would like to make an announcement that after my presentation, there will be a talk by Jeroen Doornbusch from Euronet, also here in the Netherlands, giving a talk about innovation in fisheries. Okay, let me see how I operate this. So my role is a Chief Science Officer at the Pelagic Freezer Trawler Association. I've been in that capacity now for 5 years. And what I do in that role is to develop the capacity of the fishing industry to contribute to science and to profit from that contribution to science. One of the, let me see if this is working. Yeah. So this is a plot of the number of fishing vessels that are active on a Sunday afternoon. This is last Sunday. And the reason that I'm showing this is to demonstrate how many fishing vessels are out there at sea, even in the weekend. So normally you wouldn't see research activities in the weekends because the research vessels are in the harbor, but fishing is always going on. And that's something that we can make much more use of than we have done in the past. I'm still. At the same time, the fishing industry is, of course, very dependent on the scientific advice that is coming out. The setting of the quota is determined based on scientific advice. And there's often a question about how good is this advice? Should we have more input into to make the advice better so that we get advice that matches our impressions of what's happening with the stocks? So this is a plot of the Danish fishing news 2 years ago when there was a mackerel advice that nobody understood. But the question then to the fishing industry is how can we make it better? So we have many vessels at sea. We have large uncertainties about the estimates of stocks. And we have a large interest in making sure it's right so that we don't harvest too much when the stock is low and that we don't harvest too little when the stock is high. So what can we do to make it better? Now, in my role, I want to talk about how you can link between science and industry. Now, traditionally, what we see is that there has been a lot of collaboration already between fishing industries and science. Normally, that goes in a way that fishing industry is supplying some information. It's taken up by the scientists in research institutes. They go away. They do all kind of work and analysis. And maybe at the end of that process, there will be a feedback back to the fishing vessels or the fishing industry. But normally, that's something that only takes place very late in the process. And what I'm advocating is a new way of working between industry and science, where the fishing industry has the capacity itself to deal with information, providing a feedback mechanism within industry. So we're collecting it, but we're also providing feedback. And then we're sharing results with the research community. So that's this new way of working that I'm promoting within our industry. And you can see this as a sort of social innovation. It's not just about data being shared. It's about new ways of working. It's about being effective because we are out at sea. We can contribute, collect information. It's practical. It meets a social need because we can go into detailed type of analysis. And it's empowering. It's making sure that the industry is not just delivering information, but it's also knowing what it is delivering. Okay. So I work with the Pelagic Freezer Trawler Association, which is an organization that represents the interest of around 17 freezer trawlers in Europe. And 5 years ago, I came with the association and we set up this research program as part of the industry. So our ambition is to contribute information wherever we can and to make sure that we follow up on that information as well. So it's part of our research and knowledge strategy that we developed. And there's many different aspects to that, but I would like to share two elements with you today. One is about the way we are sampling within our industry, and the other is about how we use acoustics from fishing vessels. I'm not. So to start with, I would like to talk about what we have started to call self-sampling. This is a relatively simple tool, but it's yielding a lot of valuable information. And I'm going to demonstrate that with some of the examples later. So what we want from this is to get insights into the process of catching fish. It's in the fishing operations, it's in the environmental conditions, it's on the where are we fishing, how deep are we fishing, and it's also a way of discussing the fishing operations between scientists and the industry. So we are having many conversations on board of fishing vessels, listening to the questions that come from the skippers and trying to deal with that in the outputs. We are also thereby contributing knowledge to the scientific and management system, and we are working with real-time and accurate data. I started this work already in the beginning when I joined the industry, and it's really building on what was already going on. So when you come from a scientific institute within the industry, you think that you bring all the knowledge, but you find out that most of the knowledge is already in the industry. It requires a way of making that knowledge count. So we developed a program that is building on the ongoing activities within the fishing industry. And then the basic start that we made is to standardize the data collection process, making sure that when we record information, we do it in the same way, and that everyone follows the same type of rules in that process. As this is a new type of development, one of the important steps in that process has been the engagement within the industry. So I went around, visited many vessels, went on board with vessels, worked with the crew, worked with the skippers, got them to understand the process that we were in, how that would benefit their future operations. And that sort of built up the momentum of getting a fleet of fishermen that are really into the scientific process. So we started slow. We started with 2 vessels. We got to know the process, what we were expecting of each other. And it was deliberately on a slow pace initially. And right now we have all the vessels participating in this process. I'd like to show this slide, quite proud of it. So all our vessels are now contributing to the self-sampling, and we know exactly what is going on in the fishery. We know where they're catching small fish, we know where they're catching larger fish. Everything is known, and we are sharing it within our industry and also partly with science. So this is an overview of the way we have expanded the program. So here you see the number of vessels participating by year, and the number of trips, the number of days that we cover, the number of hauls. So in these years, we have now covered 25,000 hauls and a total catch of almost 2 million tons of fish. And the last column is the number of length measurements that we have taken, or that the crew have taken in that process, which is also quite astonishing. So with a very little change in the procedures on board of the vessels, we are now capable of generating a lot of information that makes us a different type of partner when we talk about research. Now, one of the things that I think has been very important in this process is the feedback mechanisms. Now, being a scientist myself and having worked at a research institute for many years, I realized that a lot of the feedback mechanisms have been underdeveloped. And every time now I meet up with scientists and they talk about collaborating with the fishing industry, I let them talk for some time, and then after a while I ask them, and how is the feedback organized? How do you feedback your results back to the industry? And in most cases, I would say almost all cases, the reply is that that is something that will happen later at the end of the project. So in our case, I think it has been really important to work on the feedback mechanisms immediately. Let me see if I can get the screen back now. So the way we have done that is for each trip where we get information, we are supplying a short report back to the fishing vessels where we are addressing the findings that are relevant for them. And we're providing also general metrics on the catch compositions or the type of species, or all information that is could be useful for them and it's useful for science. Okay, so with that, and because of we have now this full collaboration within our sector, we have an almost up-to-date information about the catch compositions. So here, for example, there's the length composition of the herring catches of the last 5 years. And we can do that by area, we can do that by month. We have a lot of information available to really understand what is going on in the sea. And that makes us quite a unique source of information. But we are also contributing new types of information. For example, with herring, we are measuring the fat content, and you can look at the development of fat over the year to see, are there any changes happening in the ecosystem? Is there enough feed available for the herring? Is the fat content changing by area? So we are also contributing in that way new information to the science. Importantly, we're also sharing information. So every time we are producing an overview for a specific expert group, we'll make a report out of the data and submit it to these expert groups. What is also, I think, very important is that we have been able to work with science to be able to demonstrate the results of our approach. So it's not just that we are collecting information. I will also take that information and go to the expert groups to discuss the results. And I think that's an important element. So all in all, I think that this self-sampling is a very effective way of getting information from fishing industry into the science. And it's changing the role of the fishing industry in the scientific process. We become an equal partner instead of a small contributor to the science. The second topic that I would like to discuss is about using vessel acoustics. And by the way, if there's any questions that you would like to raise on the content of the talk, you can write them in the chat, and I'll try to take them up at some stage when it's appropriate. Okay, the next topic is about using vessel acoustics to generate information on abundance of fish. So the self-sampling is really documenting the catching process and the catch compositions. The acoustics is looking at how can we say something about the abundance of fish. Here's an example of the blue whiting survey in 2019 on the left, and the PFA, the Pelagic Freezer Trawler Association catch data of the same year, the same months. I don't know if this works now. So was a sort of animation in this that if you put them over each other, they are exactly the same. So we are fishing in the area where the survey is taking place. 2020, we have the Corona pandemic, and there is no research survey carried out this year. So now we have only the catch data from the fishing vessels. But what if we could also contribute the acoustic data, make acoustic recordings, and thereby say something about the abundance of fish in the area? That's an ambition that we have and that we're working on at the moment. We want to improve the capacity of fishing vessels to contribute that information, but also to make the data collection process easy and non-intrusive. What we want is to process information already on board and then synchronize that process data with shore-based systems so that we can do it real time and with many vessels. We are working now on calculating abundance indices from these type of data. And what we hope to generate from this is being able to use data from many vessels to calculate the abundance. So in the past, if you think about a research survey, you have 1 or 2 vessels, maybe 5, collecting information. The view we have is that we should be using information from many vessels, so 10, 20, 100, so that you do a sort of complete mapping of where the resources are. Specifically, we are now working on trying to generate an abundance index for blue whiting in 2020 from the data of fishing vessels. The technique we use for that is called the ocean box. It's been developed by a company in Norway called Sustainowate, and it is designed to do autonomous recording, onboard processing, and live sharing of results. So the processing on board means that we are dealing with the acoustic information as it is coming in. So we are removing the noise, we are removing spikes, we are trying to detect the schools and calculate the abundance in acoustic biomass. We're also collecting information from other sensors. And this can then be shared with a shore-based system. In our case, we're working with Microsoft Azure, which takes in information from the fishing vessels, but can also take information from other sources, for example, from satellite data. And this can then be used to generate standardized reports for different user groups. So for the skipper, for the fleet manager, for the scientist, and for the industry as a whole. So we are in this process, and we now have 5 vessels operating with these ocean boxes, and we're really testing out the system to see if we have the techniques ready to be able to scale up to many more vessels. So the ambition is to get all the vessels of our fleet participating, but you could think of other fleets also contributing to this type of knowledge framework. Just if you think about all the vessels that are out at sea, and if we could use the echo sounders of these vessels to generate abundance indices, then we suddenly have an enormous resource available that we could use for improving the science. So again, it is a new way of looking at how we can work between industry and science. It's very effective because it's using the information that is already on the vessels. It's practical. It's showing that we can make a difference as an industry, and it's also empowering the industry in this process. So how fisheries can improve science, I think I've demonstrated a number of examples. I think we should be making use of the fact that we are many. There are many vessels at sea, and we want to make sure that the scientific advice that we're receiving is as good as possible. So that's our overall ambition, to make the scientific advice as good as possible and to contribute to that process. So to do that, I think it is important as fishing industry to invest in knowing what is going on. It's not enough, in my opinion, to complain about the science not being right. We should be aiming for how can we make it better and what type of contributions can we make to improve the scientific process. And importantly, I think it's really critical in that we have the capacity within the fishing industry to understand the data that we are collecting ourselves, to make sure that we know what is going on. As I said, we are many, and that is the great potential of this type of approach. So I think it is a new way of dealing with our responsibility as fishing industry in the way we're using the resources. We are investing in becoming part of the scientific world. We become a partner of science rather than an external entity. We're trying to improve the reputation of fisheries by demonstrating our intentions and our way of collaborating. As a benefit, we also better understand how the scientific advice is generated. And in the end, the hope, of course, is to also get better scientific advice that is understandable and expected because we know what is going on. With that, I would like to close this contribution, and I'm open for questions or comments from the audience. Thank you. Are there any questions that people would like to raise? So there's a question from Sarah asking whether we can distinguish the fish stocks with the ocean box. I presume that it is intended as a distinguishing between different fish species. That's definitely an ambition that we have. Maybe, I don't know how familiar you are with this topic, but it is quite a challenge to be able to tell the difference between different species on acoustics. It's one of our other work programs, is finding mechanisms to tell the difference between the species. So that's something that we are working to. Right now, we are using the system mostly in areas where we know that there are only 1 or 2 species available or around at that moment. But we are still hopeful that we can develop the technology to tell the difference between the species. It's an important element for being able to generate an index of abundance, because you have to know what species you are actually measuring on. So on the one hand, we would like to be able to use acoustics for species identification. On the other hand, we also have the catch sampling that is taking place. So we know what is being caught in the area where we are measuring the acoustics. And we can make use of that catch compositions in interpreting the acoustic signals that we see. Okay, there's now a question about the acceptance in the fishery research environment. It's an important question, something that we have worked on a lot, because there is a sort of traditional distrust of fishing industries in the research community. I've been active in fisheries research for almost 20 years, and when I moved to work with the industry, there was suddenly a very different approach to my participation in the scientific research. So there was this idea that I would become a lobbyist for the industry instead of a researcher. So what I've worked on hard after that is to demonstrate the added value of the collaboration between industry and science, and demonstrating, according to the scientific principles, how we collect the data and how we can use that data for science. So I basically take all the data under my arm and go to the expert groups to explain the information and to make sure that it is picked up in the expert groups. And it's a slow process, but it's happening. Right now within ICES, we have had one working group last year on the links between fishery science and industry. And we have 2 more workshops planned for this year and next year, dealing with comparisons of the self-sampling data with traditional data, and also on the data sharing methods. So we are working hard on making sure that it's not just collected, but it's also it's being used and being taken up. I hope that addresses your question. Are there other questions that you would like to bring up? If not, then I would like to thank you for your attention, and I hope that this has been useful for you. If you want to reach me or ask me questions afterwards, you can see my email address on the slide here on the left. And I'm happy to answer any other questions that you may have in the near future. Thank you very much.